Our focus reading this morning comes to us from the book of Job, chapter 23. We'll read verses 1 through 17, the entire chapter. Hear these words from Job, chapter 23. Then Job answered, "Today also my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, but he would give heed to me. There an upright person could reason with him, and I should be acquitted forever by my judge. If I go forward, he is not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him, or on the left he hides, and I cannot behold him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. But he knows the way I take. When he has tested me, I shall come out like gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way, and I have not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured in my bosom the words of his mouth. But he stands alone, and who can dissuade God? What he desires, that he does. For he will complete what he appoints for me, and many such things are in his mind. Therefore I am terrified at his presence. When I consider, I am in dread of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If only I could vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face. May God add a blessing to the reading and the hearing, but most important to the doing of God's written words. All right, it's time for a children's sermon, and I trust this children's sermon may fall even on the young at heart. Well, good morning, boys and girls online. Good morning, folks here in church. As usual, I have a question today. What are some big emotions that you've felt before? Well, I'm sure you've been happy when things are going well, but I've also bet you felt sad when things don't quite go your way. Have you ever been disappointed? You know, like when your parents won't let you have ice cream for dinner? Shame on them. I mean, that disappoints me too, because I love ice cream, but wait, I'm a parent. I can have ice cream anytime I want, even for dinner. Maybe you've been amused by a book you've read or a show you've watched, or when someone told a joke that was funny. We all experience a wide range of positive and negative emotions. And it's okay to feel what we feel. And we have to learn to manage our reactions to what we feel. Can I tell you a secret? Now, don't tell the adults. Even adults need to learn and relearn how to control our reactions to what we feel, especially when those emotions are big and overwhelming. You know, being human is sometimes hard work. Have you ever felt guilty? Like even though you weren't responsible for doing anything wrong? When I was your age, I felt guilty for things I didn't even cause. And I thought if I could just be perfect and do everything right, all the bad things would stop happening to the people I loved and the things that I cared about. I was so confused because I thought God was mad at me and that God was punishing me, even though I wasn't directly responsible for any of it. Thankfully, as I grew older, I realized that God was definitely not upset with me when my family members died. Just because I had talked back to my parents one day or snuck a snack before dinner when I wasn't supposed to. God is just not that angry and upset and mean. You know what else was you know who else was confused about why he was suffering so much? In today's passage, there's a good and righteous man named Job. It's spelled J-O-B like job, but it's pronounced Job. He's upset because he can't understand why God would allow him to suffer so much. Job's family had died unexpectedly, and his livelihood was also destroyed. In addition to his broken heart, he was also nursing physical ailments that were awfully painful. Job was afraid that God was extremely mad at him for something, but he didn't know why. What had Job done to deserve all this hardship, you might ask? Nothing. Nothing. Sometimes life is really difficult and unfair. Now, I don't know all the reasons why that is, but good things happen to bad people, and bad things happen to good people. Life's like that sometimes. And it's not because God is punishing you or that God is mad at you. It's perfectly fine when we take responsibility for our own actions, but you are not responsible for the things that happen that you don't cause. For instance, sometimes parents get divorced, and oftentimes children think it's all their fault when it is absolutely not your fault. Job insists that he does not deserve what happened to him. He tells God that he feels angry with God and that he feels far away from God. And let me tell you, when you pray and talk with God, you can tell God exactly how you feel and why you feel that way, both the good and the bad. When you're angry, let God know. When you're lonely, let God know. When you're happy, let God know. Now think about this. Job told God all his emotions, and they were eventually recorded in the Bible, which is why we're reading them today. So you're in good company when you let the Lord know how you feel. Oh, by the way, God's pretty big and God can handle it. Well, let's pray together by repeating our prayer out loud. Our God, we thank you for your unending love and for always letting us tell you how we feel. Take care of me, my family, my friends, and my church. Amen. Well, thank you, children. I'm going to speak with the adults now, and you're also welcome to listen in. If you have any questions, though, don't be afraid to ask them, because we learn by asking questions. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit several African American churches in Arkansas. There I met Bishop Chester Thompson at Zion Hill Baptist Church in Camden. And I took the opportunity to glean from his wisdom because he had been pastoring for nearly 40 years. Whew. Amid the laughter and chatter, I wrote down a bunch of notes from my time spent with Dr. Thompson. My only regret was that I didn't record our conversation. When we went to lunch, I felt like I was dining with a celebrity. Everyone greeted him with a different title. Some people called him bishop, others called him pastor, a few children called him coach, and teenagers, and then a few of the elders, older than him, called him Chester. Apparently they were friends with his parents. When a minister stays in one place as long as he had, they earn generational trust. Even though they pastor one congregation, they may serve many different churches, one every 7 years or so, that happens to be housed under the same roof. As people age, as they die, as they're born, the church changes. And pastors get to celebrate some of the significant and even simple milestones, but they also accompany people through the difficult days and seasons. Pastors are meeting makers. Now, we definitely don't have all the answers. I know you're surprised. But we do make time to help you sort through life's questions with faith, hope, and love to guide us. Talking with Dr. Thompson reaffirmed my calling. It's a gift that I'll only be able to pay for. And while we were sharing some of our memorable ministry moments, I can't say that 4 times fast. He said something that absolutely took my breath away. He said, "Craig, so much of my ministry is reminding my people to trust God when they cannot trace God. I didn't need to write that down, because his words were forever inscribed on my heart the first time he said it. Trust God when you cannot trace God. At one point or another throughout our lives, we all become acquainted with our good friend Job. Which is why I think this biblical book is classified as wisdom literature. There's a certain universal quality to Job's story. His suffering is like a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. And if loss comes in bunches, well, let's just say Job has his hands full of bananas, tomatoes, and grapes of the wrath sort. It's awful. But I'm sure some of you can relate. The sudden loss of a job, an income that you desperately need, a catastrophe that renders your home or business a total loss, the unexpected death of a spouse or a child, a diagnosis that immediately tumbles you into the grief cycle like clothes in a laundromat. Any one of these calamities would be too heavy a burden to bear alone. Yet, Job experienced all of them. And Job felt the utter despair caused by repeated traumas and his constant bouts of depression. The bookends of today's passage give us a glimpse into his pain. On the one hand, verse 1 begins, "My complaint is bitter. His hand, God's hand, is heavy on me despite my groaning." And at the end, Job says, "If only I could vanish in darkness, and that thick darkness would cover my face." Bitter groaning and darkness are fitting descriptions. Now, you may not know this, but Job is the patron saint of those who suffer with depression. If you think I'm overstating Job's PTSD, his post-traumatic stress disorder, and his battle with depression, well, you should thumb through chapter 7 of Job and see where I'm coming from. Now, I don't have to wonder why so many people turn to Job's wisdom when life takes an unexpected turn. It's because he's been there, he's done that, he's torn the t-shirt, and he has the requisite empathy to sit right with us, right where we are. It's not so much that we know how Job feels, or that Job knows how we feel. He doesn't. But Job speaks sometimes what we feel. Like he's given us permission to grieve the losses we experience by reading his journal, which thankfully appears in our scriptures. Another part of Job's story resonates with the bereaved and the suffering. You know, Job's friends didn't provide him with the best advice. But to their credit, they did show up. And they let him talk about his pain. I mean, even if they interrupted him with trite sayings about, the prosperity preachers of his day. I'm sure they meant well. But given the circumstances and all their dry eyes from crying themselves into a drought, even those bumper sticker spiritual slogans were buckling under the pressures of Job's constant barrage of loss. He and his friends were all searching for God, and they were trying to understand why everything was happening because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. What befalls us doesn't always make sense. Even our faithful reactions to what befalls us don't make sense, except that our muscle memory kicks in when we can't. When I think of Job, I can't help but think of him walking through his own valley of the shadow of death. How he trusted God and he kept going will always inspire me, and I hope his journey inspires you too. The second half of that verse from Psalm 23, verse 4 is where things get hairy. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You know this. I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff will comfort me. Job doesn't seem to fear evil. But in chapter 23, he makes it clear whom he fears. I'm terrified at God's presence. When I consider I'm in dread of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty terrifies me. Now, Job might know in his mind that God is near, but in his heart, God can't be found anywhere. Job certainly doesn't feel the comfort of God's and the good shepherd's rod and staff. He feels like he's being beaten by them, stricken for some reason which he cannot comprehend. He doesn't deserve any of this. What's remarkable about this story is how consistent he is to live out his own values when not one person would have ever questioned Job had he just cursed God and walked away from the faith and religion altogether. This might surprise you, but I don't think I would have stopped him. Job didn't have faith in order to serve himself. Job had faith to serve God and care for others. Instead of drifting away from the Lord, Job was actively searching for God. The complaints he levied against God were not showing his lack of faith. They were actually showing his depth of faith. All Job wanted to do was to present his case, have his day in court before the Lord, who judges the quick and the dead, because he knew that seeking redress from God would prove beyond a shadow of doubt that he was blameless and he was due for some relief, or at least some answers. It's like he's grabbing God by the lapels and saying, "Come on, let me have some answers." You see, Job continues to practice, and he continues the rhythms and the rituals of his faith that sustained him during his banner years, which he probably can't quite remember. But he trusts God when he cannot trace God. Although his faith seems admittedly weak, Job is still fighting for justice. He remains faithful, and he blesses the name of the Lord. Throughout the whole book, Job makes several confessions that blow my mind, truly. And I want to share just 4 of them with you. In Job chapter 1, he says, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Wow. In Job 19, he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives." Lives. Job might have felt dead, but he knows that God is in the redemption business and that God, his Redeemer, lives. In Job 23, he says, "God will complete what he appoints for me, and many such things are in his mind." Who can know what God is thinking? Job sure couldn't, but he was trusting him when he couldn't trace him. And in Job 42, he says, "I know that you, God, can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." Do what? Job, have you known evil? Because they're pretty crafty and cunning. I don't know that Job would answer that. I think he would just nod. It's incredible, really. We have the luxury of knowing how Job's story ends, but we also know how it began, and frankly, it's a lot more unsettling to think that the Lord and Satan, which is the Hebrew word for the accuser, are having a conversation about Job that begins with God praising his servant, saying in verse 8 of chapter 1, "There's no one on earth like him. He is a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." And in verse 9, Satan, the accuser, answered the Lord, "Does Job fear you for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all he has on every single side?" That's the accuser saying, "You're protecting him. He's got a lavish, semi-charmed life. You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But if you will stretch out your hand right now, and you will touch all that he has, He will curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well. I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what? Very well. All that Job has is in your power. Only do not stretch your hand against him. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And as the Craig Janney paraphrase reads, all hell broke loose. God was right. The accuser was wrong. Job never cursed God to his face. Can't help but think he probably wanted to. Job's life improved, even though grief became his constant companion. But that's not the core of today's message. When you find yourself searching for God and trying to make sense of unsatisfactory circumstances, I encourage you to search the book of Job and find respite in his journey. You might even keep a daily journal of your experiences and your honest to God feelings. Something only you will see. And like Job, you should also search deep within yourself to uncover your bedrock values. In verse 10 through 12, Job says, when God has tested me, I shall come out like gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I've kept his way. I have not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured in my chest the words of his mouth. Job's piety was not for public consumption, as the accuser wrongly alleged. Job's devout faith in God was his steadying core. Tragedy doesn't just change us. It also exposes who we always were. Living from your bedrock values when you hit rock bottom will make you proud of who you become after the dust settles and the fog rises. Our natural instinct when we fall is to grab onto something. My hope for you is that you will hold fast to your values, trusting God when you can't trace God, keeping your faith in God when you can't feel God, and searching for God when you can't see God. And let me tell you, you are not alone. You are never